Hello, 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 everybody. Happy Pride Month, and welcome to the 15th episode of Like Clockwork, a podcast of Chicago filmmakers. It is my privilege to announce the start of the Reeling Pride Month Film Showcase, which starts today, right after this program at 7 p.m. Chicago filmmakers, and continues every Friday for the remainder of June. Next week on Like Clockwork, we'll have Latoya C. Flowers, Emily Martin, and Alice Avery. And after that, Alice is actually showing her short film Angel as part of the movie presentation of the movie The Five Devils. So that will be the continuation of our Pride Month film showcase. Today, we're privileged to have Rebecca Fons as our Chicago guest. And she is joining us with our friends, Lynne Sachs, Clint Enns, and Jessica Macor. Clint is on the way. So, in the process of unveiling, Clint may merge into our digital sphere. This is forewarning. In the meantime, though, hello everybody. Some of these people are like dear family, both to the Chicago film scene, to me and my own personal life, my own film career, and influences, and just amazing, thoughtful people. So it's really a privilege to be able to convene this conversation today. I'm going to pass this off to Rebecca, who will give a brief introduction, and then we'll make our way around.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here. We were saying before we started just the joy of being able to kind of like share and share alike with like-minded people and talk about what we do and what we love and how we do it and why we love it is really a pleasure. So thank you. And it's so nice to be the fellow Chicagoan on the podcast, and we're only a few miles away from each other. So hello to the north side. My name is Rebecca Fons. My pronouns are she, her. I am the director of programming at the Gene Siskel Film Center, which is a public program of the School of the Art Institute. We are right downtown Chicago, 164 North State Street, across from the Chicago Theater. I've been programming film and been a film curator all of my professional life. I got my start at the Chicago International Film Festival. I got my start before that, but I'm not going to tell you like what I was programming when I was 12. You know, that's sort of like a little bit further, deeper cut than you need. So I got my start at the Chicago International Film Festival. I was the education director there, so I was programming for younger audiences in classroom capacities. And after 9 years, 10 festivals, I left that role to rehab the cinema in my hometown in Winterset, Iowa, a historic movie theater called the Iowa Theater. And after that, I came back to Chicago full time and did some programming in Iowa City, driving back and forth between Iowa City and their cinema film scene, which is a 5-screen, 2-location art house cinema in my town of my alma mater, University of Iowa in Iowa City, and then started at the Films Center. It's like film scene, film center, film festival. I like mix it up all the time, but you know. Then I started at the Film Center in January of 2021. So kind of in the heart of closure, in the heart of pandemic, in the heart of like virtual, what is virtual programming? What is in-person programming? What is the future of cinema and movie going? So that's it in a nutshell. But my whole life, I've been going to the movies and thinking about the movies. And it's been my pleasure to do that for work, but also because I love it and because I'm a movie lover.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And of course, bears mentioning too, we were lucky enough to have the opening night of Onion City at the Film Center, with Conversations at the Edge, and Lynne Sachs. Right before that, actually, came into town to show her feature film and a collection of short films, where I really found also the Q&A following, in particular the short film section, which you were present for, was particularly interesting and deep into the threads of Lynne's work. So there's a lot of different ties here. I'm going to pass this off to Jessica, and then we'll make our way back around.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Jessica Macor. I'm a film curator and programmer, as well as a researcher and professor, trying to finish my PhD dissertation these days. Well, I'm speaking from Paris, where I've been based in for the past 14 years. I'm originally Italian. Um, I've been working for the past 10 years in all kinds of institutions, from bigger film festivals such as Locarno or Cinéma Durel or Film Marseille, to smaller events, very underground, such as the Marseille Underground Film Festival, which is a fairly newborn, I'd say, DIY film and music festival in France. I've as Yeah, just for also in the meantime, I worked for 5 to 6 years at Collective Jeune Cinema, which is one of the, I'd say, probably one of the oldest film co-ops in Europe. I was working mainly as a film programmer for the festival that the collective organizes, which is the Paris Film Festival for different and experimental cinemas. I programmed there for 5 years, and then I co-directed one of the editions. I guess that will be that.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And Jessica, of course, like as we were just saying, is joining us from Paris, so it's particularly late. We thank you so much. And I also would like to express that in addition to all of these accomplishments, Jessica also has moderated multiple Q&As on the spot, translating into multiple languages with extraordinary fluency. This is one of the great people who I've had the pleasure of meeting over the course of filmmaking. And that brings me to Lynne Sachs, who, as I've said before, is one of the most important people to my own upbringing and filmmaking, who taught us a class at NYU called Media Mavericks, one of the best, and who also has a long history with us here at Chicago Filmmakers. So, Lynne, take it away.
Oh, it's so great to be here. I mean, I can really say I've had a relationship with Chicago filmmakers for over 30 years because I'm an experimental filmmaker, I make sort of alternative documentaries. I also write poetry, but Chicago Filmmakers was always the place in the middle of the country that you would head to if you had a new movie. And there have been so many interesting and committed and inventive curators there that who made us as filmmakers think about our work in really fresh ways. And so it's been a like part of my growing up as an artist is having that connection. Also, I should say that, I think really like Rebecca and Jessica, I have a commitment to artists being part of a community and thinking about the the relationship that you have to the audience is also the relationship you have to your students. Not that you're an audience is a group of people you're teaching, but it's a group of people with whom you're asking questions and then searching for answers, and you don't give them answers. You're on the same quest. So that's really important to me, and that's why, like, I met you in a teacherly capacity, but really I just felt like I was showing you things that enthralled me, and I wanted you and your colleagues to be aware of. I'll also say I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm going to just mention that because I would say the filmmaker who most influenced me as a young person was a man named Reverend L.O. Taylor, who was a Black minister and filmmaker in the 1930s and 40s. So in high school, I had a job taking his films around to his church. He had died, and I would take them to churches and show them to the people, the congregants, and they would try to identify people from his footage. And he shot with a Bolex, and his images were absolutely extraordinary. So when I saw that a person could be so connected to a camera and to his community, that was like an awakening for me. So I thought I would mention him, and you might not know his work unless you saw that film. Um, but Sermons and Sacred Pictures was the first long-ish of 30 minutes alternative documentary film that I made, and I made it in 1989, and I've been going ever since.
Oh, this is going to be an amazing conversation. And like I said, we're having some technical issues when it comes to the appearance of Clint Enns. But Clint also has been using an alias image in his marketing for like Clockwork, which if you know Clint, it also makes sense. So as soon as we find Clint, I'm going to bring Clint in also to give an introduction as well, before I'm going into presenting. That being said, Rebecca, I'm going to put the spotlight on you. You have 10 minutes on the clock.
Oh, wow. Okay. And we're right on time too. So like, I'm ready. Oh my gosh. I just put myself on full screen. I don't want to see myself only. Okay. I've got it. I'm not killing time. I promise. So, I think, in prep for this conversation and then just hearing, from Jessica and Lynne, thinking about sort of the things that keep us going or the things that inspire us. And as a programmer, for me, I'm always really kind of like my juices get flowing, and I really love thinking about the act of movie going and the act of seeing and watching and experiencing a cinema together. Cinema, whether it's a short film or a festival or a Top Gun or whatever it is that you're experiencing, that act of seeing it with people and seeing it in a space that's not your home and not your couch is something that's always really fascinated me. And I mentioned in my bio that I left the Chicago International Film Festival to rehabilitate the historic movie theater in my hometown. My hometown is 5,000 people, maybe. It's the birthplace of John Wayne, surprisingly, and also the place of the Bridges of Madison County. If you've seen the Clint Eastwood film, they filmed it in my hometown. So it weirdly has this cinematic connection. And this movie theater, the Iowa, is like very, very humble. It's a single screen, 150 seats. And it's not like I lived down the street from Film Forum or that I even had a film festival in my hometown, but this little movie theater that just played new releases and not very well, to be honest. Like the projector was terrible. Like even as a 9-year-old, I was like, your bulb is dim. I knew there was something wrong. But this humble place is really where I found that I wanted to work in film, and I wanted to think about movies and audiences together, because it's so cliche to be like, it was home and it raised me, but it really did. I mean, I saw anything they played. I saw it a couple times over. I went with my friends. I went, by myself. I had my first kiss there. It was like, this was such a foundational place for me. And so when I think about like origins and why I do what I do, it's because I was at a very young age influenced by the act of moving my body to a place to then sit down and experience something with strangers and friends and people that I know. So that's a very humble start, and it's still very powerful to me. And so to rehabilitate that space and make sure that it remained a movie theater has been one of the biggest professional pleasures of my entire life. And I did it alongside with my mother, who still lives in my hometown. So to do it with her was a real passion project and such a pleasure. And so doing that, and then also, working at the Chicago International Film Festival, which is, it takes, they do programming year round, but it's 2 weeks basically in the fall. And it's this intense, as all festivals are, it's this intense kind of like, gigantic mammoth marathon, and thousands of people come, and there's literally spotlights, on the festival and on the people there. And then it's kind of over. So, I experienced that kind of programming and that kind of curation and that kind of movie going of people lining up and buying passes and seeing 7 films a day and kind of like, gorging on the cinema that they wanted to experience. And then, since then, rehabbing this humble movie theater, and then working at art house cinemas that are year round. That's a much different grind. When you have a festival and it's 10 days, like the tunnel is there and the light is at the end of it. Whereas when you work at a cinema that's year round, it's just constant. You're constantly, programming and thinking about what's next, even when we're focusing on what's present. So I think about movie going all the time in all of these different capacities, in the festival way, in the, local movie theater, in the more like urban spaces in bigger cities. And that's what I love. I mean, like, I'm so fascinated by the process of going to a movie. And I think we talk about this a lot these days because, like, quote unquote, like, the death of cinema is upon us again, and like, let's hope Spider-Man saves the cinemas this weekend, that's kind of always the headline, right? In the New York Times or IndieWire. But really, beyond those headlines and beyond those big blockbusters is like many people getting, choosing a movie, choosing a cinema, choosing a time, choosing the shoes that they'll wear, deciding to drive or take the train or ride the bus or walk. Will they take a jacket because they know the movie theater will be closed? Will they go with someone? What seat will they sit in? Will they get a beer? Will they get a popcorn? Do they want to add salt? I mean, like, I don't want to say there's hundreds of decisions before you go to a movie, but the amount of decisions that there are is like so beautiful to me and so fascinating. And there's so much room for error and like for giving up. But people don't. And people, whether you have an audience of 5 or 500 or for 5,000, like, decisions have been made. And I think what I love as a programmer is there's so many decisions on my side too, so it's like, what film do we program? What film don't we program? What time do we show it? What day of the week? Is a 2:00 better than a 3:00? Do we do a Q&A? Do we do an intro? Do we have, the sound up a little bit more because we just think it needs it? We make all these decisions too. So that's such a special arrangement. And so even though certainly I have favorite filmmakers and I have favorite decades and genres and eras, really, to me, I just am so focused on that act of movie going that, to me, like after that, it's the quest that Lynne spoke of. I mean, to me, it's like I'm always learning and seeing new films. Like, I'm never worried about that. The death of cinema is like, LOL, like, that's not going to happen. Like, there is a history, and there's a present, and there's a future, and they are all vast and rich and robust and beautiful. To me, the thing that exhibitors and programmers and curators and distributors and artists are also need to think about, or the other edge of that is the act of movie going and kind of encouraging that and always encouraging that. I was just at the Cannes Film Festival, and the last film I saw, very poetically, was this film called Room 999. Is that right? Yes. No, Room 999, which was 40 years after the Wim Wenders film, Room 666. Is that right, or am I adding it? Anyway, in 1982, Wim Wenders made a film at the Cannes Film Festival where he had filmmakers sit in a room and he asked them questions, and they had like 12 minutes to answer. And the questions were like, what's next for cinema? And so another filmmaker did it this year. So it's 40 years later, she filmed filmmakers at the Cannes Film Festival last year in 2022 and asked them, is cinema a dying art? And it's, it was like Asghar Farhadi and Claire Denis and Ruben Östlund and Lynn Ramsey and Wim Wenders also. And the answers were interesting. Like Wim Wenders was like, yes, the death is here. But Asghar Farhadi, his answer was my favorite, because he said, no, cinema, is here to stay, but it is the act of movie going. It is the act of prioritizing cinema that he worries about, that he worries is in sort of not the death knell, but we certainly need to like revive it as a collective of people who care about it. And so yeah, I think that my process, as much as it is watching films and as much as it is considering voices and authenticity of voices and diversity of programming and what we shouldn't show and what the Film Center stands for and what our mission and our values are and why it's important to match our programming with that. As much as I'm thinking about that, I'm always thinking about each individual choice that is made by each individual moviegoer to prioritize those films and that act of going and the act of moving. We were saying sort of like, kind of like an object at rest stays at rest. I'm a little bit like that. Like before we started recording, it was this like, I keep going and that keeps me going. So I think if we can encourage moviegoers to consider that, the movie space, the cinema space as part of their steady diet and their healthy diet, then I think like we're okay, because the cinema is there, film is there. The spaces like Chicago Filmmakers and Chicago International Film Festival and Chicago Film Center and Facets and the AMC River East and Alamo and Music Box, of course, like these spaces are vibrant and the things that are on screen are spectacular. We just want to make sure that they reach the audience that we've designed them to reach and that we hope will connect with the film. So that's always what I'm thinking about. And I see my time. I'm watching my time very carefully. That's what I'm thinking about, whether I'm programming something that's more mainstream or something that's a deep cut or something that's artist, very specifically curated for an artist visit, or something that will kind of, seemingly come and go. It's all about that larger question of the moviegoer and movie going, that process.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I know that this is going to produce quite a spirited debate afterwards too, and I very much look forward to introducing also our next guest, who wasn't here at the beginning of our presentation because of a small technical error. And Clint, it is amazing to, first of all, to plunge you into like Clockwork. So keep in mind, I understand I'm sort of throwing you off a cliff here. But if anybody can speak for 10 minutes about interesting things regarding film, I know that you can. But please introduce yourself and take it away.
Well, hey, my name's Clint Enns. I guess I'm kind of an artist and filmmaker living in Montreal, but right now I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And most of the time I don't have problems with technology, but for some reason today it just didn't hit right. Today I was thinking I was going to talk about something outside of cinema, but related on the periphery of cinema, found objects. I was going to talk today in particular about vernacular photography, which are like the ubiquitous snapshots of everyday life. They're usually not intended to be artistic and not even technically proficient. Yet these are some of the same reasons that I think this form of photography continues to capture the imagination. Although there might only be one gem in a collection of amateur photography, that one photograph is often more compelling than the moments captured by those who consider themselves "quote unquote" professional artistic photographers or filmmakers. In this case, these vernacular gems reposition the amateur as an artist and reveal the sort of inherent democratized nature of photography. A gesture of which found footage maverick Mike Holboom has referred to as a form of aesthetic Marxism. In 2004, I would argue that something sort of happened with with photography, the primary social function of photography transformed through the birth of Web 2.0 and the way we shared our images online. This year also ushered in what sociologist Nathan Jorgensen has described as the social photo, those moments that are those photos that are taken to be shared, not to necessarily preserve the past, but to show the present day moment right now. Look at me now. The photographs seem to scream. At one time, photos were intended to preserve the past, and now they are they exist to display the present. And while academics were busy exploring the consequences of the archival turn, the general public was distancing themselves by scrolling through their Instagram feeds. I think in order to better understand this sort of transformation, is worth examining what art historian Jeffrey Benton has referred to as art history's worst nightmare: boring photographs. So I'm talking about vernacular photography, but I'm going to talk about what this means to borrow images from the internet, found images online, found vernacular photography, let's say on Flickr or on Instagram, and just borrowing and stealing them from other people. With the found image, one's not saying, I took this photo. They're saying, I took this photo. That is, I took them off the internet. I didn't pull the trigger or hit the button, unless you mean the download button. A century ago, some argued that photography wasn't an art form since it was simply replicating nature using a mechanical device. Art at the click of a button. What is seemingly overlooked using this line of inquiry is that photography has transformed the world around us. That is, it transforms it into an image. Through the use of a camera, the three-dimensional world is reduced to a two-dimensional framed representation of the world. Taking this one step further, it is possible to argue that photography itself is a found art form. You find the moment in time, you find the composition, and you capture it. By placing found images next to each other in a collection, they are transformed. They become something different. You read them in a sort of form of montage, if you will, or you can even conceptually organize them, as artists have done. So people often talk about image dumps when they upload too many photos to their social media accounts. But of course, a landfill is also a dump. And isn't the internet the largest cultural trash can that we have? Perhaps an image dump is in reference to defecation. That is, when one takes a dump or shit. Ironically, I often feel as though I'm collecting cultural excrement when I'm looking at these found photos online, just to like discover what secrets hide within, what kernels of corn I can find or whatnot. So exhibiting these images is hard, or can be hard. Found photography, at least in Canada, and in particular in Quebec. And I'm not talking about fair dealings, but more ideas of consent. There are many statutory limitations on the exclusive rights of copyright owners in the Canadian Copyright Act, including fair dealings or fair use in the States. And this exemption is important for most artists that deal with found images of any type. Fair dealings is a defense against copyright infringement, and it's deliberately ambiguous. While there are many conditions that must be met in order to meet the fair dealings requirement, in practice, it's just mainly, is the work transformative, or are you using the image fairly or ethically? Like the Phil Morton, speaking of Chicago, Phil Morton, what does he say? He says something like, copy it right and make copies. It's the right thing to do, right? But there's also might be an ethical component to that. Copy it right, copy it right from an ethical position. Do the right thing. In Quebec, it's a bit different. So copyright's not such isn't the big deal. But for found photos, although it is complicated when you're talking about found photos found on the internet. It should be obvious to anyone who has ever read the terms and conditions of any social media network that they're signing over many of their rights and privileges. So, well, the original uploader, I imagine, has read all of the terms and conditions. They probably had to click yes that I received all of the proper consents necessary in order to upload this image from everyone in the photograph. And I promise everybody reads those terms and conditions. And like a website on the World Wide Web is not necessarily an in real life art gallery. However, it should seem fairly obvious that an image that is on the internet as opposed to in a gallery has a larger potential viewership. After all, the images on the internet can be viewed from anywhere at any time of the day, not just during the gallery hours and for the duration of the show. Yeah. So I was just thinking about like displaying a collection of found images on the internet and what this means. I'm not claiming that that I'm a lawyer. I'm working as like an artist or maybe like a cultural theorist and maybe like masquerading as a lawyer. And I have no idea how any of this stuff would play out in a court of law. I'm sure it will never happen. I've never thought about the consequence, like the legal consequences of an image. I've always, of course, think about the ethical consequences, but I just kind of pursue ideas freely with following like an artistic impulse or an obsession, and I've dealt with the consequences after the fact. But I do find it shocking that corporations seemingly have more rights to work with and harvest our collective images and data than artists do. But maybe this isn't so shocking. We live in a capitalist society, and a profitable project is always considered more valuable than those made to satisfy like an artistic or creative intellectual curiosity. Like when a business puts up a poster, it's called advertising. When an artist does it, it's called vandalism, I think. I think some like the problems with collecting and exhibiting found photography is it like feels very voyeuristic, and I often there's this like weird voyeuristic impulse within me sometimes, and I find it strange. But I wanted to discover sort of the point at which my responses to the images break down, and I take on different readings when the different readings take over. Sort of like a methodology which might be seen as similar to Barth's, who was always looking for the third meaning. To me, images in a collection offer different ways of understanding photographies and the ways in which the worlds in which photography has made possible the representation of the world. And I find like in the images that I collect, they act differently than the images that I normally see on the internet. When I'm scrolling through my social media feeds, I'm very rarely confronted by an image that forces me to question its very existence. But by contrast, like almost every image in my collection of internet vernacular, I ask, like, why does this image exist? Why did someone choose to document this moment? Was this image intended to be beautiful, or did it serve some other function? Who's the person behind the camera? What lies outside the frame? There's always an elephant outside the frame. And why have they chosen to share this particular image with the entire world? And I think I'm going to end at that point.
No, it's perfect. That was perfect timing, and also at a perfect summation point to what you've done. Though is really pull up, I think, a lot of my own sort of interrogation of image and ownership and of the space that's outside, even to the extent to which we're able to quote capture the landscape in front of us. The camera, I think that obviously there's something potentially voyeuristic every single time somebody looks through a viewfinder, but there's also something uh, deep to this flattening of space that you're talking about. We've talked about a few times on the podcast, but that speaks to an essential lie. And maybe that's a negative way of contextualizing it, but I do think that a lot of the act of image making or of photographic image making, cinematography is on the basis of lying. So I
All good artists should lie.
Oh, I mean, of course. Jessica, I think you're up next. Oh, I
Yeah.
pass it on to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks. It's really a pleasure. Actually, yeah, I was. I really carefully listened to what Rebecca was saying about her experience and what inspired her to become a film programmer. As since I had quite the opposite experience, so that was really something to me. Since I, I come from a small town in Italy, and since the mid '90s, so since I was a or still a child, all the movie theaters started to close. So by the time I was a young teenager, there was no movie theater left. So I really had to build my film culture on, I'd say, alternative movie places. First one being um, at home and using the borrowing the DVDs from the public library, who just set up a service to borrow DVDs. And they started out, they had 50. So that was my experience. But also at the same time, um, to me, things changed a lot when I moved to Paris for my studies, and there I mean here I discovered another kind of attitude of towards movie going, where and the whole distinction, the whole difference with Italy and the I'd say the setting and or the depressive setting of my small town, Italy, that led me to go to public library and borrow the DVDs, but also with a group of friends, start small private cine club. Basically, like we will pick up a night during the week, and we will pick up a film and just watch the film together. Like sometimes there were 10 of us, sometimes there were 12, sometimes there were 20, and people were just sitting on the floor, and then we'll discuss about it. That is basically creating a space to watch and discuss films out of nowhere, basically. But going to the big town, Paris, I really discovered that there was another attitude towards movie going, and that attitude is mostly let's go to the movies, which is without knowing in advance exactly what we're gonna watch. We're not taking the subway, walking on, or taking a bus, um, just for a specific film. Of course, that can happen, but most of the time, I'd say it's a 50-50 situation, but like 50% of the time it can just be, let's go to this movie place that I like and see what they're showing. So when I started programming films, and also I didn't start out, although my specialism, I'd say it's in what I would call hybrid films. I didn't, of course, I didn't start out programming in film festivals that were showing explicitly or exclusively this kind of films. But I really, what I um, started thinking about is if to what if we expose to this kind of, let's say, curious moviegoers? What if we do expose them to um, another kind of films? And that leads me to this um, basically thought that I had, a question that I would like to raise today, which is something that I really deal with every day as a film programmer working for film festivals. So that means like having to deal with a huge amount of films that are submitted, um, which is the one of film categories, and maybe uh, the obsolescence of film categories. And by film categories, I mean the general trichotomy: fiction, documentary, experimental, and how we still have to navigate within these three um, reductive categories. Uh, when there has been in film history, and there still is, a more than vast production of films that really cannot fall or actively refuse to fit into any of these three genres. So, for example, as filmmakers, whenever you apply to a film festival that is not already dedicated to a specific genre, one of the cases that you need to check in order to submit your film concerns one of these categories. So, in order to have your film seen by a first person, I'd say, so film programmers at a film festival that will decide whether your film will make it or not to the big screen, there at least, you're generally asked to define your work with any of these three words. Just you pick one, just one, and that is probably both on the filmmaker from the filmmaker point of view, but also from the film programmer sound of view. That sounds both deceiving and reductive, and I really wonder every single day what would happen if US filmmakers check all of these cases or none of them. And I really wonder, who are these cases made for? For us programmers, for buyers, for producers, for audiences? What do these categories really tell or anticipate about your work? Do they create an expectation or even a bias? Um, and I really wonder what would happen if these categories didn't exist, and if we just started to consider films for what they are in their complexity, without having, to put hashtags or reduce works of art into just a single um, word or definition. And I really wonder if, I mean, there are, of course, besides these three general categories, other terms whose aim is to broaden the spectrum a bit more. Um, for example, the term nonfiction, but there is in this term a negation particle that already betrays an opposition to what can be perceived as a certain standard that will be fiction film. So it really doesn't, so this term nonfiction doesn't really say much besides that. But we can really wonder what happens to essay films, because they are most of the time incorporated either into the experimental category or the documentary category. But we could argue that none of them is that does really fit. And also, what if you're also using fiction in your essay film? So that isn't accurate at all. And I really feel that we end up dealing with inaccurate categories just for the sake of putting a category that is quite deceiving. So my point is, or my question is, what would happen if we just think about showing films without giving a certain category? Wouldn't that give some chances both to films and to audiences to watch those films freely? So that is my question nowadays, I guess, or it's been probably for the last 10 years, but those are just a few reflections.
You've opened up a can of worms, too, especially with this group of filmmakers. Oh my god. Um, the thing is, yeah, no, I mean, I I actually think that the reason is far more political, and uh, the thing is, politics. Certain types of politics are embedded in an unconscious way, and I know. Don't worry, Lynn. This segues over to you too. Hopefully not poisoning the wells a little bit with what I'll say, but I went to NYU, and narrative or documentary. This was if you weren't that, you were experimental, to the point where in my first week there, somebody said, "You're not even a filmmaker. I don't even know what the heck this is. Like these aren't movies." Like, well, I mean, definitively they are, but in the sense that's it was like the first week, and I was like so sure. I was like, I'm not going to get made fun of anymore or bullied. And then boom, right? You get into a different a space, and you recognize that people are very protective over these categories. So what does that mean? To be protective over these categories seems to mean to be protective over a type of definition of the representation of reality. And so I think it's a perfect segue, actually, to then move over to Lynn, whose work in many ways both stares that head, like right directly, just stares at it, and somehow finds or supersedes some of the points of negation and cynicism that I typically might even put in my own work. But that is why I am always inspired by her work. So thank you, Lynn, for being here.
Well, I have to say I have so many notes from the three of you. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. I'm actually uh, kind of excited because I'm going to turn our whole conversation uh, in inside out, because we've been talking about kind of macro issues of the way that cinema as a culture circulates in the world, whether you're talking about individual images or watching movies. So I told Michael that I wanted to talk about structure, and I wanted to talk about um, the what I think is the most challenging part of filmmaking, and that is finding a shape to your work, because essentially what we're doing is taking the chaos of everyday life and giving it a temporal, at least in traditional filmmaking, single channel filmmaking, giving it a direction that happens over time. And that's extremely complicated in the best of ways. So I most definitely find myself in both the experimental and documentary world, but I work in a hybrid way. So Jessica, I'm gonna have a lot to talk to you about. But one thing that I'll say about my own practice is that um, when I'm envisioning jumping into a film project, and most of my films people would call essay films, I figure out what's going on in the center of the film and how can I climb my way out to find the beginning and the end. And usually I don't know the end of the film until I'm actually cutting it and until I actually shoot it. And let me tell you, that is not the way that that film students are taught to make films. In fact, and I think it's a shame, but people are expected to write what they call treatments, and treatments are supposed to predict where you will go before you go there. And so in that way, I think it's like they're vetted by funders, they're vetted by teachers, they're vetted by friends, and I am constantly involved in the process. So I rarely say a film in progress, I say a film in process. And I'm going to talk about 3 films, and probably you all haven't seen them, or actually Rebecca has, and Michael has, but I'm going to talk about them in a general way. So even if you haven't seen them, it's fine. Um, so the first film I wanted to talk about is a film called The House of Science, a Museum of False Facts. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because it has a term, it plays with a term that I've heard found footage filmmaker Craig Baldwin use, which is called parataxis. And it's the idea of having kind of a double helix structure. So that in that film, I was collecting images of the ways that women understood or didn't understand their bodies through both art and science, but I was also writing poetry at the same time, and I didn't realize that the poetry I was writing was actually the skeleton of the film. So the interaction between words and images was part of my quotidian life, but I didn't understand when I was making the film in 1991 that there was a trajectory or a journey in which things were happening, and in conversation and in a dialogue. And so I had to be open to that. And I think that's like kind of an exciting aspect of the art practice that I've embraced, so that like you're writing in a sort of poetic form, but you're also shooting images and you find that they reveal things about each other. So another film of mine is called Your Day Is My Night. And I wanted to bring that up in terms of process, because it very much is a hybrid film. And it was a film that I thought would be a documentary about a group of people who live in the Chinatown area of New York City. And that they all lived in what are called shift bed apartments. But while I was making the film, some of the people, the subjects, as they say, told me that the film would be boring because it was just about their lives. And so I said, I better listen to them. I better allow them to create a narrative element of fiction. And I agree with you, Jessica, that the word nonfiction is comparable to the word atheist, which is that you define yourself by what you're not. But anyway, in that film, I allowed them to create a parataxis that was a fictional element, so that they could invent aspects of their lives, have a freedom to run away from the world, from the existence that they had followed, and become something new. And that was really interesting to me. And then I wanted to talk about the search for those were, I should add that in all of those films, I was searching for a structure and crying. Like every film I've ever made, I discovered that it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And part of that trajectory is understanding that the challenges in making any work of art are actually the tensions, and that's a like you learn the hard way, but hopefully you learn. So I made a film called Film About a Father Who, and that's about my dad. And I had to, oh, do you hear that thunder? It's just about to rain here in New
Yeah,
York. Yeah,
it's pretty ominous.
it's kind
Very
of,
dramatic.
I like it. Yeah. So what I was going to say about that structure is that the obvious thing would be, okay, tell your dad's life, started his childhood and move forward. But that was of no interest to me whatsoever. I wanted to give a series of reveals and secrets, and what I learned in that film, which I've actually kind of celebrated in all of my work, is that in light of this search for structure, the most exciting part of filmmaking is the transitions. It's not the witnessing with your camera, it's the juxtapositions, the synapses that happen. And this connects with you all as curators, that only happens with the viewing. That, like, it's like the triangle that creates that or the laugh or the weep or whatever it happens through your audience, and the audience creates that that segue, I guess. But a segue sounds too pat and too gentle. It's actually got to be more charged than that, but you need the audience to be aware of these formal transitions. I'm really excited when people who aren't involved in filmmaking talk to me about transitions, and I think that's what I made this film for. That, and it's not just a solution to a cause and effect. Like, I can't stand an edit that's just a cause and effect. It's got to be more generative than that. And so if someone in the audience is excited by that, I feel like, well, I succeeded. So that's my examination of structure. But I have lots to say about what you all were doing. So I'm done.
That was an amazing. Well, I you have to give me a second because I'm going to prepare myself to try to digest everything from the last 45 minutes, and to give some kind of a cohesive answer back. Um, I mean, it follows so beautifully though, with what Lynn was saying, following Jessica, because as we discussed this categorization, this pre-structuring of film, it's actually the search for structure that Lynn's discussing that actually develops a sort of creative madness within the process of making work. And I think that I've always maybe suffered a little bit from that creative madness. And I'll take it back to Rebecca's points, actually. I think that I used movies as a means of escape, and I've spoken about that on the show a lot. My grandparents, uh, they loved having a VHS player, so we always had that around, and they had collections of I Love Lucy we were talking about last week, but also just these random movies, and watching Cantinflas, and even watching like Primer Impacto. There's essentially a news program that comes on Univision, the main Spanish language channel in the U.S. and in New York at the time. And at 5 p.m., everybody would get around, and even the news was presented in sort of spectacle. But because my grandmother would clean houses, then oftentimes I'd be brought over to the places where she was cleaning because she was also taking care of me. And she'd plop me in front of a television. And then that's when I started to like really develop just a curiosity, I guess, for movies. Seeing a lot of bad like MTV music videos helps too. And I think a lot of those are foundational elements. But then crossing over and kind of beginning to find cinephilia as a an escape from what was also a very turbulent school life that I'd always experienced, and having an identity as being Latino, but also as white passing. There was some weird salve that movies provided that was also like at the same time justifying a white privilege, so that it was a means by which I felt alienating also from my own family. The thing that I learned from movies though, and why I also I still love cinema, and why I work for it, is because there's the work that actually embedded within it has a means by which to distill a, perception or experience of a break of consciousness that is so powerful that in its wake it can sprout consciousness from it. So after experiencing amazing work of art, there is a experience of no longer feeling situated in the passive experience of a spectator, but forced rather into the revolutions around one's ego, around one's self, around one's position as a political entity, or as simply a spiritual entity, with this absurdity that we live in. It's kind of also the point of this podcast, is to get to a point where we can acknowledge some of the absurdities of the reality that we're given, and the means by which we as filmmakers or as curators or as those who love cinema explore a different medium as a means of mapping ourselves back to this complete, sometimes complete, numbspiral, as I call it in my own work, for lack of better term. I think that that actually speaks to some degree to what Clint was saying. So Clint was talking about the photo dump, and Jean Baudrillard, as I talk about Baudrillard a lot, and I blame Lynne to some degree on that because Lynne's also a Baudrillard fan. But Jean Baudrillard was essentially writing about, in a nutshell, the way in which our expression, our significance, what we place into a mediated container, whether it be a symbol, a word, or a movie, itself decays in significance, or can, from the outset, not have enough significance within its structure to outlast its procession towards the simulacra, towards essential pollution, towards a negation, towards an empty container. And the problem is that through the proliferation of these empty containers, through the proliferation of these empty containers within curated systems as well, and why are they curated this way is another question. These empty containers become the social. The problem is that the social is also an imprinting technique, and the means by which media is distributed primes one for addiction, and addiction serves the purposes of capital in many regards. Also, since I'm on the subject, the words and opinions of the hosts of this program do not necessarily reflect those of Chicago Filmmakers as a not-for-profit organization. That being said, I think that there's something deeply disturbing about that. You know, there's this action by which the we were talking about with after what Clint was saying, about the negation that occurs, the lie that occurs that tells you this is life, this is reality. And I think the funny aspect of those categories that Jessica's discussing are that, in fact, they documentary doesn't make reality any more real. Narrative doesn't make a reality any less real. People are addicted to their narrative realities, and they will treat those narrative realities as they are reality. It doesn't matter
And
that
they're
they're not
addicted to
given.
below deck as well.
Absolutely. And but the point is that they have a pre-edited structure, right? They have a pre-edited structure that's based upon a democratized, but also then reconstituted thing. It's like a vomit reformation until what's left is this structure and this structure and this structure, and the variations of it. What Lynne is talking about is that pushing through the transitions in a movie can either be forced by way of a formulated marketing copy, or they can be found by falling into them. And that experience of the phenomena of falling into the right turn, because it's what you're living, and what you're living is the practice, and the practice is creating these artifacts as you're making the turn. That's a way in which the filmmaking practice is not, or can be removed from or divorced from the process of assembly line, that we see in the categorization, or that we see in the means by which we focus group narratives. And yet, I think at the same point, though, is that I do agree it's not a dead medium, because it's like this medium has got major magic in it, both bad and good, and there's not definitely not anywhere near as many magicians have touched it yet. But it's capable of really deeply metaphysically changing transformational things. And I don't necessarily say that in a positive way all the time. What as a medium, right? We can't say that it's not also responsible for some of the greatest atrocities that the world has ever seen. So we fight with that, and yet I find that push. It's so beautiful to hear you say it, Lynne, because that push to find that form, and that the way in which the structure binds with it sometimes, and you're just like living through it. It does
Or that
give.
push to find the form when you're
That's it.
on the freeway system or whatever, and you have to click the box, and you have to find the form, the right form, and it's often hard to do. So I,
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's easier to find that form if you've already talked to the programmers beforehand,
yeah, they give you a
right?
waiver. It's usually easier to find that form. But, um, uh, can we go to
I'm gonna.
Jessica's question?
Yes. No. I wanna bring it back to the round
Oh, sorry.
table. Please. Thank you so much, everybody. Now, like, gloves are off. Go ahead. Microphones can be unmuted. If it gets messy, it's messy.
I was actually gonna say something that came to my mind when Rebecca was speaking. Actually, a Stan Brakhage film came to my mind. His film, The Act of Seeing with One's Own Eyes. When so I thought about actually the activity of looking at a dead body, or the activity of a curator leading you to a dead body, and I thought about like all the responsibilities that you have, because you're both you and Jessica, you're taking people to see what we call graphic. Isn't that okay? Graphic. But you're taking people to see death. You're taking, as you just alluded to, Mike, some of the worst atrocities that humankind has ever
Well, people
produced.
play Dominic Ignaz of the North, so I don't know.
So I was just thinking about that like, oh, that it's kind of weighty, what your responsibility, you can't always control the audience, and it's not just decisions of good and bad and aesthetic. It's like I'm sharing something that is going to disturb people, but it's also going to awaken them. So I just wanted to ask you about that, both of you.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think that's one of those decisions that we think about all the time. I've certainly been in the position where I programmed something and I didn't maybe take the care I needed to either like tee it up or, content consideration note but some audience members don't want that. I mean, I'm sort of an audience member. It's a very privileged position to be in, to say like, I want to get hurt in the movies, because, but some people really don't. And it can really, make it hard for them to return to a cinema, like to return to that cinema space. It becomes an unsafe space for them. So there is a lot of responsibility on that. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes I've erred, and sometimes I've erred in the categorization. I mean, I was thinking about that so much when you were talking about that, Jessica, that idea of categorization. And like, I put a filmmaker's film, who will remain unnamed, and I will not name the film. I categorized it a certain way based on the filmmaker's identity. And they were upset. They were like, please don't like label me because you think audiences need to know that I'm a queer female filmmaker. Like that isn't what it's about for me, and I was doing that. So it's like the responsibility to the film and the responsibility to the audience, and sometimes, and then also there's moments where I'm certainly a curator who thinks like, I don't think films should go away, even if they are awful and grotesque or whatever the case may be. And sometimes, as we've seen play out, publicly, films get canceled or people think they should get canceled. And to me, I think that's so dangerous, because if we can present them in a thoughtful, respectful way within a context that isn't dangerous, and then we can have a conversation about them, then that's the job. You know what I mean? Like, even if people come away sort of hurt or angry at me or angry at the film, like that's sort of the job, right? Is to like, just like an artist is like, the job is to say what you want to say what you need to say, and hope that you do it in a way that can be connected to thoughtfully or, or aggressively even.
Yeah, I completely agree, and also that's, I mean, the that brings us back to the etymology of the word curator, which is cura, which is taking care of. So if you give the context and take care of the film, then basically you can show the film, and I'm pretty sure any kind of film, to the audience, if you take care both of the film and of the audience. But also on the other side, this idea of the responsibility brings me back to something that is always there in the back of my head, which is programming equals, in a certain sense, also a decision that is very close to censorship, because it's what you show and what you don't show, and you always have to think about what you don't show,
So
for many reasons, for very different reasons. But what you don't show, it will always be there.
I think
Still.
I think what you don't show is often the much louder kind of perspective that you're giving. And
wow,
and
I have a loud voice then.
well, I was thinking, Clint, about what you were saying about like the garbage heap. I also love the like elephant right outside the frame. Like I'm gonna use that. That's so great. But this like garbage heap, and thinking about like categorizations and garbage heaps, and like I even like pulled up on my tab like, what is various streaming channels, like what are the categorizations they're doing. And I do this all the time. I put wrappers around, like, we just did a series of films that took place during just one day. We called it All in a Day's Work, and it's like that's the entry point for the audience, and it's really fun, and it's but I went to some streamers, and like one of them is like movies about iconic lives, which I think is amazing. Feeling dramatic is a category on a streamer. Laughs
Yeah.
with the rhythm, like what? And then family dynamic movies, which is like, what movie
Oh
isn't a family
shit.
dynamic movie? So it's just like this sort of like this sense
I
of
want to
like
rhyme with
that.
reason.
Yeah, I know, right? Like what is that? But thinking about like there's these ideas of like curation or like assemblage or like we're going to decide, the algorithm is going to decide that this is where this goes, or an audience is going to decide like, oh, experimental, I don't know what that means, so I'm deciding no for my life, that I will never see those films, like that's not for me, that's the category that I reject. And I think that tension that Lynne speaks about, that like connection, that like intimate moment between a film and an audience, is like there's so many intimate moments that aren't experienced because of categorization.
I'll give you some direct censorship stuff as an artist, which is very fun, by curators, but they didn't censor you because that's always a good tool. You can always throw that back at a curator. So, for instance, around this found footage project, I made a 1-year calendar, which every image from 2004 was timestamped. So, like January 1st, 2004, January 2nd, and they're all found on Flickr, and then they all had the timestamp, and then I built a calendar year out of it. Not within the Creative Commons, but you lie to the curator too, because they're like, "Oh, is this within the Creative Commons?" Of course it is. And then you're like, your favorite Negative Land members as who authored the photo or whatever, because you always just lie. You always lie to people who have power, who are usually the curators. As an artist, you don't have very much power, so you take it back whenever you can. For instance, every film I've ever had is a world premiere at every festival. Like, why wouldn't you say that? Oh, is it 2003? Yeah. No. Or is it, sorry, 2023? When you made it in 2003, you're like, oh no, you add a little 2 on change of the file. You add a 2 to it. Who cares, right? I let the archivist figure it out, so you can even mess with them too. But so, oh yeah, no, that was just a rough cut back then. But so with this, it was in Quebec, so they were of course challenging me about copyright to begin with, and then the goalpost changed and it became about consent. And they're like, "Oh, we think we want to. How would you, as the artist, like to put dots over everybody's faces because you didn't get consent to have those photos? How would you like to do that? Would you like it to be a dot? Would you like to be a red dot, a yellow dot? Which way would speak more to your artistic vision?" I said, "Well, I think you should choose the dots in order to censor me. How would you like to censor me? How would you like to censor this work? And I hope you do quickly, because I do it quickly, and let me know your choice so I can go to the press that this gallery is censoring an artist's work, because the press would love to hear about that. Those are great stories, and in fact, your art show would probably take off, right? And for the right or wrong reasons. But I don't know. I'm just like, so I wrote that text in response to that show, ironically, and so I was just thinking about power, like categorization. Fuck, I made a film. Like, why do I have to categorize it? How are you going to program it? Contextualize it? You're the programmer. Like, I don't know. Like it, throw it somewhere, put it next to some good films, and don't ruin it. And anyways, I was just like thinking about power. And Lynne, I just want to say I read your Craig Baldwin piece in the I Want to Live, and it was lovely, but it was also really depressing. It was the most depressing part of the book, but the most real as well, which was really nice. And
You're probably one of the first people to read it since the book just came out.
yeah, I got an advance. I'm going to do a little review for Found Footage magazine, I guess, and so I don't know if I can announce that, but I loved it as well. But that section it really made me like, oh, I'm getting older, and like this, like living on the masochism of the sort of margins, as Craig likes to say. It's like I live on the margins, and like, whew, it's like it's a hard life,
Yeah.
Anyways.
Oh, actually, I was going to say something to you, Clint, some writing that came to my mind when you were talking about the shift at Web 2.0, which I thought was 2005, but you're telling me it was 2004 when images.
It's in that range. It's switched kind of early. Flickr starts around a weird point in 2004. So Yeah, but it's
So
2005.
our definitions, our embrace and definition of what an image is, like, radically changed at that point. And and I think you articulated that really well, and using a framework that I hadn't quite thought of before. Definitely hadn't thought. And one of the things that people talk about these days is not only the ownership of the image, but where will the image go? Like, who will be able to control the image, and how will it be used or abused? But I was also thinking, when you were talking about some of the writers who've followed this transformation of the image from heto-sterile, and how she talks about the degradation of
Great
the image.
writer.
Yeah,
Totally.
and then also a more, like, a newer writing, which is Tina Kampft, and she
Sure.
writes
Yeah.
about listening to images, and I actually think that is just amazing, and that kind of touches on what Jessica was talking about, that you can take an image and you can give yourself the freedom to listen to it even if it doesn't make sound, which is the opportunity to like move into that hybrid zone, what some people call a critical fabulation. But and I love that term. But I love that things are happening to images where they, like, an image makes sound because you allow it to. You give it that
Which is very
possibility.
different than reading an image. Listening to an image is like a very different idea. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Also, oh, go ahead.
Sterl's new article too on mean images, on AI images, is really deadly. Must read, I think,
I'm
as
going to
well.
write that down.
In the what is it, the New Left Review or whatever?
Mm.
It's fantastic. Like, it's a must read. It just came out like a week ago or something.
I think there's also something interesting about all of these ideas that we're discussing. The word patience keeps coming to mind, like the patience that's needed for us to, like, allow, I don't know, like, allow the patience that one needs to be patient, because I think about, like, the idea of allowing an image to, allowing yourself the opportunity to listen to an image. Like, I feel like if I just walked on the street right now, and this is not I hope this doesn't sound like I'm being like elitist or like a snob, but I think if I invited 5 people to come, like, listen to the sound of an image, I think they'd be like, Mace, goodbye, like, you're losing it. But the idea of, I mean, and of course, and even the idea of, like, Flickr being the name of this platform, and, like, the idea of flickering, something's it's flickering, that, and Snapchat and all of these things, and this sort of the doom scroll of, like, trying to find something to watch, or the, like, very quick, again, the, like, this is experimental, I don't know what that means, I don't have patience for it. I mean, I've literally heard people say, like, I just can't sit through those films, even documentary, like, I just find them kind of, like, slow, and that's just also fascinating to me. It's not necessarily like, oh, like they're bad or that's bad. I just find it really, really interesting to think about what we feel we have the capacity to experience, and what we decide we cannot experience because it is too slow, or because it is too fast, or because we don't understand it, or we think we won't. And I think, some of that categorization, or some of the, like, the garbage heap of the internet is like a crutch or an accommodation for that. Because I would love, love, love to just program film, and, like, not write synopses. And I went to a museum in Seattle, and there was an exhibit where I didn't realize it, but there was a book that you followed along with that had all the work. But I went through it, and there were no plaques, no artists. I mean, artists need to be credited, but and I just explored it, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going the right direction. I don't know what this is, but I like this one. And oh wow, these are together. There must be a reason. And then when I came back around, I was like, oh, there's a book. And here I take the book and I walk around, and I kind of did a speed lap through. But just the idea of just encouraging someone to go or experience or watch or listen without any, I mean, this is in complete contrast to
But
the
these are
idea of
the
having to take care of a film and contextualizing it properly. So I'm contradicting myself, but
But this is like one of the problems. Like, I never read program notes before I see anything, no matter how good the curator is or whatnot, because I want to be able to come out and, like, have my own ideas about it. And I find that, like, that usually restricts it as opposed to opens it up. And then, of course, you bounce your ideas off whatever the curator or whatnot has written. or the artist even, and especially those films you don't understand. You're like, oh, I don't know, I didn't get that.
Help
Maybe I'll
me.
check out what they have to say about it. Yeah. So it's like, but yeah, I always find that it's usually it's better to go in fresh without, like I don't read the Vulture review before I watch a Below Deck episode. Why would I do it for experimental film?
Right. And then there's, of course, the categorization of award giving, and like this is the award winner, this isn't the award winner, this is the good, this is the bad, this is the acclaimed, this is the unknown. So the categorization is endless of how we wrap films and wrap filmmakers and programs and exhibits.
I think like that's when Craig comes in too, where it's just all kind of like, or this form of aesthetic Marxism where it's just kind of like, scrubbed away, award winning. What's that mean?
And well, the thing is too, Craig, I've heard Craig speak about the work, the process, in a way that in itself is like ironic, but it's also like absolutely true. Which is to say, he said stuff like, "I can make a narrative on no money at all. Like, look at what I could do. I could take scraps from this stuff and put it together, and it's just as potent a narrative as what you're putting together with millions." And you begin to think about that from the political economic model, and what's being said is actually really interesting. And I think a lot of people, when they're like high-minded, art-minded, they think about that and they think, oh, well, that makes it like essentially that's low brow. But no, like that's economics, that's hustling, that's what's what we're being fed to do. And if anything, also there's a generational difference with how you hustle. And I think that's where I'll leave it from my point of it. But I say, like, especially as we're talking about control of different uh, tools for the distribution or dissemination of your work, and whether or not it has categories, what the function of that work is. If it comes from a political minded perspective, you always have to be hustling. And I think that kind of speaks to a difference that I see in experimental film in particular. Maybe it is in the larger industrial filmmaking crowd as well. But I think that the ways in which we make our hustling like something we wear, and we just have to essentially um, market for ourselves slash do anything as possible to slip the structures that are built and sort of the institutional structures that we contend with. Yeah, hashtag influencer. You got it. By the way, I don't know if anybody knows this, but there is a chat that people could actually like for future episodes. But we also have our own backstage chat, and so Clint Enns. I will make a copy of this so that we can also put this out to our audience, because it's beautiful. It begins with the comment, "Duration is dead," and it just goes from there. So, I'm going to give it around to last words, and then I'm just going to say bye and cut it off. But I much love to everybody. This is great.
Ooh. Rebecca, go for it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I wish we were like at a dinner table and there was like the 17th course coming out and we were, but until then, yeah, I think Lynne, your word process, and then this idea of patience and almost like perseverance. I'm going to alliterate my last words, thinking about like the perseverance of a filmmaker to experience the process, to be patient with the process, and then the perseverance of audiences to like seek further, go further, look beyond the frame, look beyond the beyond the page to find out what work reaches them and what it means to them, what angers them, what frightens them, what turns them on, what overjoys them, what speaks to them. I think if we all do that just as consumers of art and consumers of film and makers of film and makers of art, I think it'll be a much more interesting future that will maybe fight the AI too. I mean, I'm not like really afraid of AI,
No!
but like that's a whole other conversation. But just my last word is an AI, but my last word is thinking about the perseverance.
Embrace it, baby.
Yeah, and the patience that requires. But it's far more pleasurable. My last P.
That will be part 2. Yeah, part 2. And then I got to get Peter Lichter on. Again, he was like, I do not care about the AI. And I was like, yeah,
I love it. I love it so much. I'm not with the Stirl as well, but
I wanted to say that the word when Jessica brought up the etymology of curator, it was actually something we don't talk about that much because we often think of curators as decision makers, and instead you really flipped that, like that. And I felt that in this Zoom room, this not Zoom, Vimeo room, that I feel like I'm with a group of people who care so much about this medium, and we haven't been talking about it in any way other than that it brings us passion, and that it is generative in terms of ideas, and that's just extremely meaningful to me.
Go for it.
this is dead air. Okay, I'll take over. I just as an artist, like it's not very often I get to have a 17-course meal. So if any curators want to invite me out for a 17-course meal, I'm usually in.
I'll find a sponsor for that. I'll find a sponsor for us.
I'll have a to-go box.
I can't even like. I just want to now speak because I've caught the AI bug. I'm obsessed. Like every day I'm at the pub. It's a different story, but like generating images and having fun with it and embracing it. But that's totally different. So, but I still accept invites for meals. So, thanks.
And Jessica, you were the last word.
Oh, whoa, so much pressure. No, I really, really appreciated this conversation. It was really, it was, there was a lot of great inputs. So yeah, and also I really felt a lot, but mostly as a viewer, what Lynne defined as the moment within the transition, the moment of transition where you know that something is happening, and those are the moments where when I discover films for the first time that really fill me with joy, and I'm always smiling, and I'm wondering why is anybody looking at me is like smiling at myself, smiling at the screen, but but also these are really the moments that I enjoy the most when I discover a film, and what makes me say I want to share this film with as much people as possible. So thank you so much for thinking about that,
Bless
and
you,
also
too.
for explaining that moment from the point of view of the filmmaker, which is very precious.
Thank you. Thank you for
So,
Okay, now
Thanks,
say
everyone.
quick. Bye.
bye bye.
oh, it's already bye.
Bye.